So thank you for having me and thank you for joining me today. So this is British Research Methodology, the how, what, and where to search. And I wanted to start with this because it's important to define what we mean by British research. When we look at this, the inner yellow circle, that's what we call Great Britain. That includes Scotland, England, and Wales. And the United Kingdom is that red circle moving outward that includes Northern Ireland. And of course, we have Ireland, which includes the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And then the big blue circle all the way around is what we call the British Isles. So I'm going to touch on, a little bit of the Irish records, but really we're going to focus primarily today on Scotland, England, and Wales. But the methodology is really about the same. So whenever we're researching, British research differs from American research, but not that drastically in a variety of ways, but not in the value of the records and how we go about researching them. So we always want to work from the known to the unknown, right? So when we talk about the known, that's what's proven. We want to discover other records within that. So when I look at the question like this that comes up on Ancestry, does John Gilliam match the person in your tree? I don't want to click that too quickly. I want to remind myself that I really do need to analyze each one of these records and not just say, well, yeah, it's John Gilliam. I was looking for John Gilliam. This is the right guy. I want to make sure I'm looking at all the information and does he really match the John Gilliam I'm looking for, because no name is that unique that we're not going to find people of other that are not part of our family tree that are have the same name. So we always want to think about the quality of the records that we are researching. We want to look for original records whenever possible. We want to also look at derivative records because they can be very accurate and very helpful. And we want to look at authored narratives. An original record covers things like census, birth, marriage, and death certificates. Those derivative records are things like indexes, translations, extracts, abstracts. Again, very good records, but they're not the originals. And of course, authored narratives are things like family histories, social, local histories, military histories, things like that. Again, very good records, but we have to analyze them just a little bit differently. We want to correlate independent, high quality sources of information. When we talk about independent, if we have two death records or two records related to a death, those are not independent records because the same person may have presented that information in both those records. So we want to get those independent sources. So here we have a marriage record for a Sarah Pidcock. And this is a nice record, talks about Sarah getting married as a young woman. We also have a census record for her when she was a little bit younger. These are both high quality independent records because the person who presented the information for her marriage record is not the same person, very likely, that added her information to the census. So these are both fit the criteria of being high quality and independent. We want to look for original records whenever we can, but of course, original records have both primary and secondary information. So it's good. We have to analyze those a little bit as well. Here we have a record for an Elizabeth Waddle. Whoops, I think I went one click too far in. So, this death record, we have the name of the parents, we have where the person was born, and whether they are a consort of or unmarried as a category. All great information about the person who is deceased, but we need to look and see who is the one supplying that information to know how much we can depend on it. And it appears that the mother is the one providing the information for her child. And, this Elizabeth Waddle here is the E Waddle that is listed over here. So we know that this is good quality primary information because the mother certainly knows where, where and when her child was born. So looking at those types of things. Going back to the derivative records, that can be those abstracts, extracts, or indexes. Here's one for John Grizel. I have lots of examples of Grizels and Colemans because that was the first brick wall in Britain that I broke through for my family. So it's one I've researched a lot and made a lot of mistakes in researching as well. So here we have a vital record for John Grizel. It's in the England Marriages, 1538 to 1973. And it just shows his a marriage record. So another index taken from the original records that can be really helpful. And then the author narrative. So here's an example of a really nice one that I've done some research in. So Soldiers of the American Revolution from Southwest Virginia. They've, basically this one, they've done a good job of reporting where they've got the information from. So even though it is a narrative record, it gives us all the information as genealogists on where they found this record and how we can find the original documents potentially. So it's a really good example of a good quality authored narrative. So when we look at North American records, what we're really trying to do before we hop the pond back to English research or British research is we are trying to find specific information that's going to help us in that search. And my guess is most of you that are here today, if you have tried to do British Isles research, you might be here because we realized that the unique name we thought our ancestor had really was not very unique, and we are overwhelmed with the number of results, and we can't narrow down what we are hoping to find. So, we always look at what's like some of the minimum identification needs are, and that would be a name. And obviously, we're going to search by a name, but if we can have other information about the name, maybe their nickname or the name, the pet name they used within their family, something like that, expanding on that name just a little bit is helpful. We also need a date because we know that that same name is going to be found across generations and, in a number of record sets. So having some kind of a date, ideally a birth date, but when that's not possible, having another date like a marriage date, a death date, somebody in the family, maybe, any of that kind of information helps. We want to have a place, and that's what we're really trying to find, because if we can narrow down where in the British Isles they came from, we have a much better chance of finding those records. We want to have a relative, if at all possible. Did they travel over to America with somebody? Do we have a parent's name? Sometimes we need to pay attention to what they've named their children because they tended to have naming conventions. So your oldest son is probably named after your father, those types of things, or the husband's father. So there's naming conventions. So if we find a family that has Daniels and Sarahs and Williams and, a lot of the same names. And then when we're researching in England, we suddenly find Benjamins and Marys and other types of things. That gives us a clue as to maybe this is not the right family because the names just don't seem to match the naming pattern that we're used to. So we want to start with North American records when we talk about, a methodology to look in the British Isles then. So where to search when we're in America. So we're going to look at census records because they can be very helpful. We're going to look at, birth, marriage, and death records when they're available. We're going to look at citizenship records. There's a variety of those. We're going to look at church, military, and local histories as well. And there may be some other records that we also want to look at to answer our research question. I like to start with this image, not because the 1790 federal census necessarily gives us a whole lot of great information of genealogical value. We don't have parents' names, different things like that. I like this one because I've heard people say it's like women aren't in the 1790 federal census. And of course they are, because they are heads of household. So we have Bridget Jones here on the this top arrow is pointing at. We also have James Jones 2 lines below her, and he spells his name Jones with a Z on the end. I don't know if you can see that, but it's very unusual spelling for Jones. I've done quite a bit of research on this spelling of the Jones name, and it is not common. So when somebody has their name spelled like this in a record where the other Jones are spelled with an S, and this individual spells his Jones with a Z, that's a pretty specific clue that's going to help us. So even looking at these early census that don't necessarily have great information on how to help us hop the pond, necessarily they may have information like this. So it's worth it to look at everything before you try and go that next step back to Britain. I like this example as well. This is a Colorado census for 1885. It asks for the name, occupation, place of birth, and some other details that can help us correlate information. I know it's really difficult to read this copy, but to me, the exciting thing with this one is that it asks where you're born and also where your parents are born. So we have these individuals in 1885 who are saying, oh, I was born in Ireland or Scotland or England or Wales, and they're telling where their parents are born. I like the Welsh, the Welshman there at the bottom, because he was born in Wales, his father was born in Scotland, and his mother was born in England. That's a great clue that's going to help us correlate other pieces of information if this is accurate, and it likely is. And then birth, marriage, and death records. This isn't one of my Coleman, but I like this record because it gives some nice information. We have a Merton Coleman. We know when he was born. We know where he was born in England without any other specifics, but it gives his occupation. It gives his death age. It also gives us a family history film number, which may provide additional information. So these types of things can be really helpful in getting us across the pond. Another record that I positively love is this District of Georgia citizenship record. At one point, I would have said, oh, they don't have, states don't have citizenship records, and I would have been very wrong about this. This is an 1804 record, and it is positively beautiful. I'm going to read just a little section of it because I know it's a little bit difficult to read. But it says that your petitioner is a subject of the King of Great Britain, born in the province of Munster and Kingdom of Ireland, that he is aged about 32 years and by trade a cooper, that he arrived at Charleston in the state of South Carolina on or about the 24th of April. So he's giving a lot of detail in this, and this, again, is a state record of naturalization. So a positively wonderful resource if this happens to be your family. There's things like military records like this that I wouldn't normally think to look at. And if I was looking for John Means, I'm not sure I would look in in a Utah military record, but he is serving or had served in the 2nd Dragoons in the Army. He's in the Utah Expedition period of service. And it gives great details. He enlisted in 1858 in Washington, D.C., so we know where he was living at the time he enlisted. It gives the date of discharge, which is the same date as the date of his death. And the date of birth says 1836 approximate, and he's from Fermanagh, County Fermanagh in Ireland. So really great information available through these types of things. And again, that's going to help you research his, his ancestry. So now to go over just a little bit of the methodology that I use, and I've learned this through much trial and error and through taking many classes that helped me understand how to apply a methodology, and I hope it helps you as well. When you start doing research, well, actually, let's go back. Researching without a plan is like grocery shopping without a list. And I don't know about you, but especially if I take my husband, I end up with a whole lot of chips and snacks and things and no apples in my cart. So I think it's really important to start with that research plan. And that includes things like, what do you need to verify? Because we tend to make some assumptions, which are not always safe assumptions. What do you need to discover? What is it you're trying to find about this individual? And being as specific as possible is very important. And where are you going to find that information? That's going to help you narrow down your search so you don't spend time, I would even say, in my case, wasting time chasing shaking leaves sometimes, or chasing that squirrel that caught my eye. So, having a plan is, where you want to start. So when you think of what you need to verify, what I'm talking about are things like, did your family that came from Britain, did they come directly to America, or did they go somewhere else? Many, many people who left Britain came to America via other places, most commonly Canada, but not always. So here's an example of a New South Wales, Australia assisted immigrant passenger list. If you're not familiar with the term assisted immigration, that means that either the local or the national government assisted that individual with paying their ship's passage, for getting their family on a ship and going elsewhere. The British Isles are a very landlocked country. And for obvious reasons, they had a British Empire where they could have their citizens go. And of course, that included America, Canada, Australia, many other places. So they might not have come directly here. So if we know that we find them here in records, and we make an assumption that they must have left England right before they came here, that may not be an accurate assumption. So those types of things, you may want to try and verify that before you go any farther. Other things you might need to verify. Did they arrive here with an indenture? Many, many people had to have assistance of that kind when they came over. If you weren't able to save enough money for you or for you and your family to come over, you could get an indenture, which basically means you traveled and then you paid somebody back through your labor once you got here. And more than half of the people who arrived in the mid-Atlantic and southern area, before the mid-19th century, had an indenture. So it affects what kinds of records are going to be available in that near that time directly after they got here. This is an example of an apprenticeship, an indenture of apprenticeship for a John Smoot, not in my family, but a positively wonderful record. He was indentured March, February 1810. I'm not sure why the variation in the months. In Charles County, Maryland, it has his parents' name as William G. Smoot, so we love seeing that. He's a carpenter and a joiner, so we now have a trade to go with him. And his master is Shadrach Davis, so we know what, another name to research here that will help us find information about John Smoot. And then what do you want to discover? Think about what questions you're actually trying to answer. So I've given you a couple of examples here of just those who, what, when, where type of questions. So who were the parents of Elizabeth Grizel, who was born about 1632? What was Elizabeth Grizel's marriage date? When did Elizabeth Grizel's spouse of Daniel Coleman die? I still have not found her death record. And where was Elizabeth Grizel born? Those types of things. We always tend to try and think of the who, what, where, when, why type of questions together, but try to avoid why questions because it's very difficult to research a why. to understand why something happened is not a very researchable question in my experience. And then where might you find the information you need? Because that's going to help you narrow down to records that are going to be most helpful. And again, you just don't want to do that name search where you're looking everywhere, because it just is not the most effective strategy. So it might be a ship manifest that you're looking for. And we know a lot of those didn't survive. It might be an emigration record that is able to answer that question, or an immigration record. And so that's leaving the country, the records for leaving a country versus those of entering a country. Could be in naturalization records, and we don't see those as early for women as we do for men, but really great records, as we saw in that Georgia example. Church records are available, broadly, and they can be very, very helpful. And then there's other records that we can also find that are helpful. So when you're executing your plan, now that you have a plan in place, when you're executing it, my strategy is always to start at the end. If I'm searching for a birth date, I want to start with their death date, because it's really hard to go to one without having built a little bit of a story. So here's one of my ancestors. I have a 1819 probate record. That means that we know that individual passed away sometime before that. That helped me find the death record in 1817, and these are mostly in Amelia County, Virginia. That led me to the 1810 census record, where I find them in Amelia County, Virginia. I got lucky on this one because I wasn't really looking for a guardianship record there in Amelia County, but I had just exhausting all the other records that were available there, and found this guardianship of a young nephew, and a marriage record in 1749 in Virginia as well, which led me to that birth record in 1731 in Prince George County, which is there in the area, because I had built all this other information from working from the end of the individual's life to the beginning. So I have found this to be a strategy that really helps. When you're executing your plan, look at all the possibilities and rule them out one by one. Don't take the first one you find, because it's not always going to be the accurate one. If you research and you only end up with one result, consider broadening your research parameters just a little bit to get more information in there, because you may be looking a little too targeted so that it matches the information you have. And you really want to look a little bit broadly and figure out who else is out there that might be messing with your results, to a certain extent. So here we have, I just looked for my William Coleman, born in 1700. I have 5 generations of William Coleman. So I have them all across, the timeline. But I looked for my 1700 William Coleman, and I ended up with just 20 results, which is not too bad for that time frame. But I know he never set foot in Massachusetts. He lived and died his entire life in Virginia. So I know that there is another William Coleman who is out there, but he's not my William Coleman. And I really want to make sure I'm not researching the wrong person. So there's those records in just a little bit more detail. The second one may or may not be my William Coleman. I need to look into that record a little bit more, because I know who William Coleman's wife was. It was not Hannah Fitzwater, but what if he married, before and she passed away, and, so the timeline is right. This could be my William Coleman with a former wife. So, just analyzing each one of these records. 20 records is not too much for you to research, to make sure you're not spending time researching the wrong person. And when you're executing your plan, pay attention to spelling variations, because spelling was not really fixed the way we think of it now. And names were written as they were heard. So you're going to get lots of spelling variations. There are websites like britishsurnames.co.uk, ancestry.com, and Find My Past that will give you a list of alternate spellings for the name. I tend to, glance at those, and then, I record things on a spreadsheet. So I do things my own way, sort of. But, it can give you some alternate spellings, and take those to heart, because, the spelling was written down the way the recorder would have heard it and interpreted that information. So it's not always going to be the name or the spelling you anticipate. Oops. And search by variations of names using wildcards, or searching and tracking all variations on a spreadsheet. I think there's a lot of different ways of keeping track of this. If you're not familiar with wildcards, let me know. I put something in the handout, I think, for wildcards, but it's worthwhile to use those wildcards to add to your spelling in your searches. Here's that Thomas Jones example again, and in this baptism record, his mother is listed there, and she spelled her name Sarah Jones with a Z. So this is a family that is very tied to that Z in their spelling of that name. That makes it pretty easy to research them to a certain extent. And then, as tempting as it is, don't look at family trees as evidence. They can provide clues, and they can provide really good clues, but they aren't necessarily the evidence you're looking for. So here I have an example of an Elizabeth H. Mott Grizel, who married a Coleman in this family tree. There was good information available in this. I'm trying to think, I made it a little bit bigger for us. So we have, a good number of sources in their tree. That's what I normally look at when I'm looking at a tree, is do they have sources? How many records do they have attached? They have 11 records attached. That's pretty nice. The parents' birth ages are about the right age to be the parent of a child this age. But remember, I'm looking at Elizabeth Mott Grizel, or I'm just search for Elizabeth Grizel, born in 1632. And we have another Elizabeth in this tree, born in 1640. That's, maybe who they're matching me up with. That, I know that 1640 is not the right name, but they could have a little mistake there. That doesn't instantly rule this tree out as far as being helpful. They've got a Virginia Elizabeth in 1648, but that's a big gap of time between a first and second child. Again, not unreasonable. A child could have passed away, or several during that time frame. Then they have Joseph, Thomas, and Thomas with the same birth year, but different death years. They've got a Rebecca. So this is just something that I want to look really carefully at, and not make any assumptions that this family tree is going to help me necessarily with my tree. I think it's more likely that they're combining maybe a couple of different families. So what if you've searched everywhere, and I mean everywhere, and you still can't find the detailed information you need to jump the Atlantic and find your British Isles research record? There's another method that I use, sometimes quite effectively. Sometimes, if the names are common, it's not quite as helpful, but it's a surname mapping method. So think of this, the same methodology applies. It's just a different way of kind of applying it to a certain extent. So this site is called British Surnames. There's a number of sites that are similar to this, but it gives you information like the origin of the family surname. It gives you a distribution map, which I'm going to show you, and some statistics and the 1881 census. So this is what it gives you when you look up that distribution. And thankfully, Grizel is a relatively uncommon name. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. And what it's showing me is where in 1881 and in the 21st century, where the Grizel surname is found. Now, mind you, my Grizels came over early, but they also didn't migrate a whole lot, in the British Isles. So you can see between 1881 here on the left and the 21st century, you see a lot of these Grizel families are in roughly the same area, not identically, but in roughly the same area. And what I'm going to do is do the same thing with a second surname. Now, my Grizels and my Colemans married when they came to Virginia in the 17th century. But that does not mean they didn't know each other before they came over. They settled in the same area. When one family moved into another area, they actually moved together. So this could be a little bit of a community that has continued to stay together. So it's worthwhile to look at where these two names coincide back in the British Isles. Unfortunately, Coleman is a very common name. So not as helpful, but I can certainly use maps to track where my Grizels are and see where those Colemans overlap. And that's where I could start my research. So that's one way of handling that. I have a little different way that I like, unless the names are really uncommon, for both names I'm looking for. And it's with surname mapping, but I'm going to put them into a spreadsheet. So let me show you what that looks like. This is Find My Past, a site I use a lot with British Isles research because they tend to kind of specialize in that region of the world. And I did a search just for the name Grizel. I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. And you'll notice I did not click the include name variants. Ultimately, I may want to include those variants, but this family was very specific. Their name was always spelled the same thing in all the Virginia records. So I'm going to assume that that name is what I'm going to actually research, and then I can expand beyond that if I'm not having good results. What I'm going to do is put in the locations in my spreadsheet, and I'm going to show you what that spreadsheet looks like in a minute. I'm not going to put the town because that's a little too specific. I really want to have it where I can put them in a spreadsheet and get good information from that spreadsheet. So I'm going to put Kent, England for this first category, or for this first person. Because this is a Shropshire register, so even though the location just says Great Britain, I'm going to put Shropshire, which is another one of those, counties within England, on my spreadsheet. I also, in Find My Past, you can sort by these various categories. So any place you see the little down caret, you can sort by. So I sorted it by year just because I thought that might be a little bit more helpful. You can sort it however you want if you want to sort it at all. Mind you, I have a fair number of results here. I only put in 20 in my spreadsheet just to give you a good sample of what that looks like. So I did the same thing with my Grizels and my Colemans. And I want to blow that up just a little bit so you can see that. And then I sorted it by the place where the family was. So again, this is just a list of 20 different, either Grizels or Colemans in that. But this is where I'm going to start researching, because I need to find a way to narrow down where my research is going to take place. And in Kent, England, I have both the Grizels and Colemans with a date of about 1730. I have the same thing in Middlesex. So again, this helps me narrow down, so I'm not just searching all of England, because I know that in this time frame, my Grizels and my Colemans were in roughly the same place. And that's what, all of our research is about, going to be about, is getting down to that local level. I just found this earlier today and had to throw it into the handout really quickly. The International Society of Genealogy actually has a surname mapping tab on their wiki. And I think that could be really helpful. It has some other sites that do that surname mapping. So forebears, GB names, the genealogist, and your family history. But of course, they have it for, locations throughout the world. So whether you're researching in the British Isles or elsewhere, that ISOG wiki might be a really helpful place for you to look for that. Okay, so records and where to find them. We're still, looking both at American records as well as British Isles records. So we want to look at immigration records, parish records, civil records, which in the British Isles are very different records referring to the same place, which is a really nice thing, but makes for more, makes it a little bit confusing at times. We're going to look at census records and some other records. So immigration records can be found all over the place. So Ellis Island, we're all aware of, Castle Garden, the precursor to Ellis Island. Other ports and border crossings, because people came in all up and down the eastern seaboard and along the southern coast. They also crossed into America, through after coming into Canada first. So lots of different places that people could come into the country. And then there's other travel records as well. So my guess is most of us probably have people who came into the country before Ellis Island in most cases. But I want to not ignore the fact that Ellis Island does have great records. I just put in Grizel. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because my guess is the majority of you know how to use the Ellis Island search if you have people who have come in since the end of the 19th century. But they have lots of good options on there and they give you really nice results. So here's, based on that Grizel search, it gives me lots of information on the individual, when they arrived, what the name of the ship was, and obviously these icons over here are giving you things like a summary of it, as well as the original ship manifest. So definitely worth looking at if your people came in after like 1890. Castle Garden at one time had their own website, but now their information can be found on Family Search. That makes it easy to search there, since you're probably looking there already at different things. They're in the New York passenger list, 1820 to 1891. Again, I used my Grizel example there, and they were coming from England, and gives me lots of examples. Again, the results on this are not an exact spelling, so that I'm getting lots of different variations and things, but that's okay. That's what we want some of the time. And here's the original ship manifest for that family. I wouldn't have thought Griswold would have been a good alternative for Grizel, but that's okay. If I was looking for this family, I would be looking rather broadly anyways. So nice, clear ship manifest information for that family that came over. National Archives has lots of information. I don't know if we have anybody who's not in America on this webinar today, but if you're a US citizen, you have access to the National Archives. But that's one of our many benefits of being a citizen. They have a great tab on here called Browse by Port of Entry. And this is going to give us other ports and also border crossings that are available through the National Archives. So I'm going to, just show you a couple of examples of this. This is the New Orleans, Louisiana, because people have been coming into New Orleans since the 17th century, maybe earlier even. Whoops. I think I went the wrong direction. There we go. So we have, records going quite far back. This is the WPA transcript of passenger lists of vessels arriving in New Orleans. We also have a passenger list of vessels arriving in New Orleans here. So different databases offering different pieces of information, super helpful, and I should mention, and of course it tells you where to get that information. So the National Archives catalog, as well as ancestry.com, which is available free at near facilities or by subscription. Now we're going to look at Portland, Maine in that same database, because again, you can browse through this. It has every, almost every state listed here. And we have, for Portland, Maine, we have passenger lists of vessels arriving at Portland, Maine, beginning November 29th, 1893. That's about the time that the border crossings become available in that late 19th century time frame. And it gives you the same information as far as where you can find those, get access to those records. This is the index to alien arrivals at Portland, Maine, beginning in 1894. That's those border crossings. And that's when they became federalized. There are other records for border crossings locally, but these are the federal records. So really great if your people came into the country across the border or elsewhere, during that time frame. And there's other travel records. Again, Find My Past has great information. And you look at the different categories that are available here: migration, naturalizations, passenger lists, transportation, which if you're not familiar with English records, that transportation refers to people who were transported at the expense of the government because that was part of their imprisonment. And remember, this is could be a time frame where people were imprisoned for stealing a loaf of bread. So this does not mean that your ancestor was a major criminal, but that's what the transportation refers to, are all the people, and there were a lot of them, who were transported out of England because of a crime, normally a relatively petty crime, because they don't want to send the serious criminals to other countries. That's, not helpful for that country. And these were still British territory or British areas they were sending them to. So lots of great categories there that were available. Whoops, there's my arrow catching up with me. Here's some of the results for migration and immigration. This is a record I positively love. I think it's beautiful. It tells so much about this, the period of history when this is. This is an emigration record. These are port records for the Port of London, telling when somebody was leaving. So this is not a ship manifest. This is a document that would stay with the port of the people who had left that area. Whoops, wrong direction. And some of the details that you can see here is that Mary Dawson is down here. Mary Dawson is 20 and she's a lady. Alice Glover is 19 and she's ditto, also a lady. Sarah Crawford is 22 and she's their servant. Edward Garney is 5 years old and he's a lad. And there's other people on this, and they're going to different places. They're not all going on the same ship. But so these are, a great record that, again, has survived when other records don't necessarily survive in the same way. I love the details they put on this because it gives you a lot of information as to where they were, where they're going. And it also says things like, this is the master of the ship, James Hodgkins, and why they're traveling. They are going for pleasure. So again, this is not intended kind of as an immigration type of record. They're just traveling. It does not mean that they didn't get there and decide to stay, those types of things. So it's a great piece of information. So it's worth looking at not only immigration records, when they came into this country, and but also those emigration records can provide really great details. Parish records. When we start looking at British records, the parish records are one of the most important record sets because every part of the British Isles was part of a parish. Think of this as being the equivalent of, a county or a town within the United States. And lots of great records available. Again, if you search just for a name, you're going to get so many results. So I put in my Daniel Coleman, and I have, 1,400 results in this England and Wales Civil Registration Birth Index. Just way too many records to look at. But you look at some of these records, the England Select Births and Christenings, beginning in 1538. Because my ancestors came over early, this is the type of database I'm going to look for, are these that cover that early time period. And these are parish records. Lots of other categories in here. The London marriage and banns records beginning in 1754. There's a Church of England baptisms, marriages, and burials beginning in 1538. There's a 1530 England and Wales christening index down here at the bottom. So these are all considered parish records, and they are invaluable when you're researching your British Isles ancestry. The Family Search Wiki has really good tools available that can help. And of course, it's free. So it's something that I like and take advantage of, especially if I'm researching in an area I'm not very familiar with. So here's Devon, England. I've never had an ancestor who came from Devon, England, so it's definitely a new area for me. But they're all set up about the same way. So it's really helpful to, kind of get an idea of what kind of information is available here. Within each of these, it's going to list the parishes. And you can see down there, click on a letter for a list of wiki pages, links for Devon parishes. If I knew the name of the parish, I could search for it this way, but it also gives me the option of using an interactive map. So if I know the location where they were, as opposed to the name of the parish, I can also just browse through the interactive map. I find it to be a little bit clunky at times, but it's worth the effort to make it work for you if that's what you're trying to determine. There's other kinds of parish records as well. If you're familiar with the nonconformist terminology, for much of English history or British history, nonconformist meant churches, not individuals, churches who did not conform to the Church of England practices. So they have an entirely different database. So if you're not finding your people in the normal parish databases, look for those nonconformists. It doesn't mean they were rebels. It means they belonged to a church that did not conform to the Church of England. And here I have my Daniel Coleman. Actually, it's not my Daniel Coleman. It's three more other Daniel Colemans. But just to give you an idea of what those records look like. Burial, baptism, and birth records. And positively beautiful records with great information available. And it is just a little bit bigger. And there's that Daniel Coleman, tells precisely where he lived, how old he was when he was baptized, different pieces of information that are absolute gold. And then there's the civil records. So we've covered the parish records. That's the local church organization, but we also have civil records equally. So you want to look at those as well. Sometimes the names for the civil and the parish are the same. More often they're not. But the Family Search Wiki has that same information available for those civil registration districts. So they have the same format of having those districts there at the bottom that you can search through pretty easily. And then there's census records. And just like our census records are super helpful, so are theirs in the British Isles. So about the middle of the 19th century, the census records start becoming much more helpful for genealogical purposes. There are earlier census records available, but this is when we see them start having a lot of good details. So this is just a random Marianne Corish. She's in the 1841 England and Wales census. And we find her in this household. And I didn't list everybody because they've got a whole lot of people in this household. But this is the Kennaway family, ultimately. And they're recorded here, listed in the order that they appeared in the census. But we have John Kennaway Sr., who's 43. We have Marianne Parsons, and she's just listed as a female, 27 years old. She may be a relative. She may not. She may be a servant within the household. We have Emily Kennaway, 35 years old, so she could be Mrs. Kennaway, the spouse of John. We have another female, 20 years old. She could be a servant. She could be, another relative. We have John H. Kennaway. He's 4 years old, so that's probably their son. We have Elizabeth Rogers, a female who's 20 years old. Again, we don't know her status, but, she's in the household. Then we have Charlotte Kennaway, a female age 66. That's probably John's mother. So again, this is great information of, with a lot of genealogical interest. So looking at the census, obviously still really valuable. Oops. Direction. Sorry about that. And there's obviously any of the databases you're used to using is something you should continue to do. So MyHeritage definitely has, they don't specialize in the British Isles, but they definitely have some records of genealogical value for the British Isles. This is their United Kingdom Royal Navy Officer Service Records. I would definitely look at that if I had anybody who was ever an officer in the Navy during this time frame, because that would be really, all those officers who were involved in our Revolutionary War might be listed in this database. So great records set there at MyHeritage. And there's, military histories, because military records are good. Military histories like this tend to be really good. I'm sorry, I keep advancing too quickly. So something like this could be beneficial for you. I haven't found any of my people in books like this generally, but you certainly might. So Find My Past is the database that really specializes in the British Isles, and they have really great records available for the British Isles. So here's one of their categories, directories and social history. This can be invaluable because our people ended up on these lists. We have directories and almanacs, family histories and pedigrees, medal rolls and honors, newspapers and magazines, and social history. We've got another category of education and work. And this goes to apprentices, colonial service, guild and trade associations. And that's because in the British Isles, they had a very strong guild system. And if you were not, you had to be trained up through an apprenticeship type of system. And then you needed to join the guild or the trade association for the type of work you did in the location where you practiced. So everybody ended up on these lists if they had this kind of trade. We've got merchant, navy, and maritime, occupations, professions, lots of great ways to search for our ancestors. You think of that seaman that we found in the earlier record. So we have, all we had is a name and that he was a seaman. This type of information might help if we just look under occupations. So a variety of ways to look at databases differently. Then there's places like the British Library. There's lots, just like we have great repositories here for researching, they have many different places there to research as well. So the British Library is a great resource, and they have records that are available online. You want to make sure and create a login for yourself on any of these that allow you to. We know there's always going to be sites that maybe we don't fit the criteria for, but the British Library is not one of them. So create a login for yourself. It's free. And then you have access to their information. They have great information available on the British Library, and much of it is available through their website. I think on my screen, I can't see the bottom arrow, but there actually is a place down here that says that you want to narrow down to the records you can view online, or find somebody in the UK to research that for you, or just plan a trip. One of my other sites that I really like on Family Search is the Historical Images collection. And I don't know if you've ever looked here before. Images does not refer to photographs. Images refers to unindexed, files. So you're going to search, instead of by a name, you're going to search by a location. So I put in, again, my Devon, England place that I was researching. And you look at the two categories at the top that it gave me, and one is Devon, England, 1801 to present. But the second one is Devon, England, 901 to 1801. that's the time frame when my ancestors would have been in England still, not in Devon, unfortunately, but they have positively beautiful records. This one record doesn't happen to be from Devon, but look at the detail of this beautiful record. It is Goathurst Estate Records, 1864 to 1916, and it's talking about an indenture for an individual, there at Goathurst. So, positively wonderful, again, if you're, researching this area, this estate, and you just look very specifically. And quite often these records have a logical format that makes it easier to browse them. So maybe it's in some kind of an order that allows you to look by a date. They might even have a little bit of a finding aid or, a little index at the beginning or the end that might help you narrow it down. So definitely worth looking at images if you're not finding success elsewhere. Again, going back to that Family Search Wiki, lots of good information. This is the top level for England. And, again, all these are set up about the same way. So you want to, kind of get familiar with this because they have things like guided research, how-to guides, how to find birth records, how to find marriage records. So they give you a lot of assistance and then point you towards the databases in their, both in Family Search as well as externally. And they'll tell you if those databases require a subscription, that's going to cost you a little something. So a good resource to know. There's other free resources within the UK. So things like freebmd.org.uk. Whenever you see BMD, that's that birth, marriage, and death records. And that's one of them that has, again, lots of good information and free birth, marriage, and death records. Lots of pop-up ads on these sites. So if that kind of thing frustrates you, maybe not the best place to look, but it's free. UK BMD is the same type of thing. And again, lots of great information on it. Genuki is one of my favorites. Genuki stands for the Genealogy of the UK and Ireland. And they have not only good records, but they point to lots of other helpful things. So if you don't have a gazetteer for the UK at home, this might be a good place for you to look at their gazetteer. I wanted to do just a broad search just to see what would pop up for an example. So I put in book down here because I know that's a term that is used throughout the UK in a lot of place names. And of course, I got a lot of place names. So, it's going to give me every single place within the Genuki site that contains that LOUGH name. I wouldn't advise doing this yourself. Narrow it down by county or put a place name in that you have found somewhere just to see more specifically where that is. You still will probably find it in multiple places, but you won't find it in all these places like this search did. Oh, there's my arrow catching up with me. Again, we talked about the National Archives a little bit. This must be where my little arrow is, but yeah, just one of the many things they have here. Famous wills, 1552 to 1854, and they have things that can be viewed online, so you don't have to go to England to access the National Archives records. A few other resources that I thought of that, or just things that I thought of after I sent this information in. When you're doing genealogy and you're using Google, and everybody doesn't like Google as well as I do probably, but I tend to Google things a lot. If you add the word genealogy to your search terms, whether you're doing genealogy and a location or genealogy and a name or genealogy, immigration records, it's going to help you narrow down that search. So I always recommend using genealogy when you do that search, because it's going to not find the living people and the modern contemporary resources. It's going to find those older genealogically valuable things. And then, of course, the Hadi Trust, which I totally forgot to put in there. But of course, they have things that are not part of the public, or they're in the public domain, that are really helpful. And I've gone in there and searched by locations, by names, by trades, in lots of different ways. And it's a wonderful resource of records that have been digitized and are fully searchable generally. So it's a great place to spend a little bit of time browsing around. You might find something fun. And with that, I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover.